because I, in person, sitting in the room right across from the head of Ecclesia Dei at the time in the Vatican, I asked him a question. Your Eminence, as a journalist seeking accuracy in terminology, is schism the correct word that I should be using to describe the standing of the Society of St. Pius X? Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. I am Michael Matt. This is the Remnant Underground. Well, the first few, 6 weeks of 2026 have been interesting to say the least. I cannot believe what's happening. You have such chaos everywhere you look. You have such division everywhere you look. Right here in my own town, we've been chronicling people getting shot, basically what looks like an awful lot like civil war. Everyone that I'm talking to lately, though, on the upside of that, has been saying, well, clearly, the spiritual war is the thing that needs to be stressed now. There are demons prowling about the world right now, everywhere you look, including politics, all throughout politics right now. So tonight I want to talk about something that if you're new to tradition or if you're not a Catholic at all, it may seem unrelated, but it's not. Just this past week, it was announced that Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, Priestly Society of St. Pius X, is going to be consecrating another bishop or two, whether or not the Vatican approves. So now we've gone back to 1988, and those of you who are new to tradition and to the Latin Mass, you will have heard that the Society of St. Pius X is in schism. Now these experts online, they will tell you that if you have anything to do with them, you too are in schism. Very scary stuff, okay? And we can, I think, put that to rest tonight. So you have these little prim and proper people who are just so outraged. They're just shocked to find out there's schism in here, when actually they disagree on something much more fundamental, and that is what happened at Vatican II. They disagree on something much more fundamental, and that is, what is the new Mass? Is it a revolution? Was it something that we should be opposing, right? Or is it just a matter of preference, liturgical preference, okay? So the basic principles are not the same, but it's kind of fun to use the society as this sort of, I'm going to end this discussion right now. Those people are schismatics. Anyone to the right of me is a schismatic. You see how it works? It's very easy just to disqualify the folks rather than addressing their issues, their arguments, okay? So we're going to try to look into that tonight. But before we get into that, I want to talk about the sponsor of tonight's show, which is Remnant Tours, basically, and it's directly related to this topic, because nobody has done a better job than the French traditional Catholics of bringing traditional Catholics from all the different groups, all the different clans, all the different countries, coming together, uniting under the mantle of Our Lady, right? And simply proclaiming the social kingship of Christ, refusing to give up on the faith of our fathers. And that's what the Sharp Pilgrimage is all about. I really hope some of you will consider joining me. We have about 10, I think, maybe 15 seats left. Spiritually, we're going to be, our chaplain will be Father Gregory Pendergraft. Oh my gosh, I mean, my old and dear friend from the Fraternity of St. Peter. He is a war horse. He's been walking this pilgrimage with me for years and years and years. And I guess as long as he can do it, I'm going to keep doing it. So we're going to for sure do it again this year together. And Father Pendergraft is an absolute outstanding chaplain. So we're really, really very blessed. And this is going to be a fantastic pilgrimage. Afterwards, we will be going back down into the western part of France. We'll go back to where the Vendée War took place, even offshore. We're going to off the west coast of France. There are some islands which I've never been to, and I can't wait to visit these islands. We're going to visit those places. They're buried there. They prayed there. They kept the faith there, just like we're trying to do now. We're going to visit shrines important to the Blessed Mother. So we're going to have a very Marian theme this year. Check it out, all down here in the description, and I really hope to see you on the road to Chartres coming Pentecost 2026. Now, let's get to this. We'll call it the Society of St. Pius X, the rest of the story. And again, it's relevant, whether you're a traditionalist or not, whether you're in the society or not, it's relevant. We know what the revolution did, what it looks like. It's important to understand what counter-revolution looks like. And the largest body of Catholic counter-revolution, Catholic restoration in the church, at least a priestly fraternity, is the Society of St. Pius X. But first, just a bit of history. Because people say, well, those guys were excommunicated, man, so obviously they're in schism. If you're new to the movement, again, don't forget that in 2007, Pope Benedict XVI, first of all, lifted those so-called excommunications from the bishops of the Society of St. Pius X. It was part of a package deal that gave us, in fact, Summorum Pontificum, and then restored the traditional Latin Mass. More on that in a moment, but you got to really think about this. If they're in schism, the society, Why is it that the Pope himself lifted those excommunications? That doesn't make any sense. Okay, well, I'm going to get into why it is, because Pope Benedict XVI knew very well that something happened in 1988 that needed to be remedied. Okay, 1988, remember, is the year that Archbishop Lefebvre consecrated 4 men to become bishops of the society, and for that Pope John Paul did not say, "I excommunicate you." He said, "By that act, you excommunicate yourself." And then there was a furor of debate and discussion over whether that was true. Did that act rise to the level of an automatic excommunicable offense? That's the nub of the whole thing. Any child can get that, right? That's the nub of this argument. Now, critics of the society, they don't like to talk about that. What, Benedict lifted the excommunications? Yes, he did. Yes, he did. They don't want to talk about that. Now, again, I want to stress one other thing as we move forward. This has been very divisive, very polarizing. And you have the two sides. You hate the society, they're in schism, or you love the society, you say there's no salvation outside the parking lot of the Society of St. Pius X. That's the only place you can get saved. So I want to really stress something here that will help you. I want to give you some peace of mind, because this is going to become the issue from now through June when the next batch of Episcopal consecrations take place. I want to give you some peace of mind. I am not Society of St. Pius X. I have never attended their chapels on a regular basis. I do not attend. Why? Because God has blessed my family with a fantastic diocesan priest. We've been with him for years and years and years. All my kids have gone through and received all their sacraments there. I would never move from there, and it served us very, very well spiritually. So that's where we are. So I'm not in the Society of St. Pius X. But if you're looking for objectivity rather than partisan bickering politics and, denouncing and excommunication and anathema sit Society of St. Pius X, well, I'm your guy. And I lived through the first time, the 1988, the first time. I remember it well. I remember when they were young canon lawyers back in the early 1990s. One of them comes to mind, who I think you'll recognize. His name is Father Gerald Murray. You might remember or know him from the great work he does with Raymond Arroyo on the papal posse. Father Gerald Murray, what's that?
Prayerful posse now.
Oh, is it? The prayerful posse.
Yeah.
I got to file that away, the prayerful posse. Father Gerald Murray was a young canon lawyer. He was not SSPX at the time, and yet he lit up the stratosphere in those years, back, I think it was in about 1990, when he argued in Latin Mass magazine that although he did not support the 1988 consecrations in Icone, Switzerland, Archbishop Lefebvre's decision, still, nevertheless, according to that young canon lawyer, that did not rise to the level of an excommunicable offense. The renowned canon lawyer, Count Neri Caponi, he argued too. He argued that Pope John Paul's declaration that Archbishop Lefebvre had excommunicated himself through those episcopal consecration, that declaration from Pope John Paul that you have automatically excommunicated yourself, he said that simply is inaccurate. It simply isn't true, not according to my opinion, but according to the law, according to the Code of Canon Law itself. I'm only telling you these facts so that you can go, okay, this was hotly debated. And anyone who says it's a slam dunk one way or the other probably doesn't know what they're talking about, or they're very ideologically driven on another issue, probably Vatican II of the New Mass, okay? So people are trying to avoid that debate, that big debate about the council, about the new Mass, by simply disqualifying the SSPX as schismatics. And I hope to prove tonight, or let you see, according to my experience, been here from the beginning, whether or not that's fair. I'll help you answer the question. Is that fair, or is that just an ideological decision to sort of disqualify the people you can't beat in an open argument? So I hope to spend the next, 30, 40 minutes trying to spare you some of the bitter, heartbreaking squabbling, the internecine fighting that went on over this issue over the past 40 years. In 40 minutes, I think we can take the lessons learned from 40 years, apply it to what's happening right now, and just prayerfully move on now into this next chapter of revolution, counter-revolution, specifically with the Society of St. Pius X, and what looks to be some new bishops coming, right? And to get there, I'm not going to rely on my own opinion, because I don't know how important or relevant that would that is. First of all, I was young when a lot of this was happening. But what I want to do is I want to make the appeals to authority that so many people have made over the years, Michael Davies had made over the appeal to authority when it comes to this question, to demonstrate that even among the hierarchy, there is no consensus on this so-called schism of the Society of St. Pius, even among the hierarchy. Okay? That's a very important point. Because if you have a lack of clarity. If you have gray area in the hierarchy, we as the sheep, well, we're kind of off the hook. We as laymen, we have no obligation to make a big dramatic declaration. In fact, our obligation probably in charity before God is to look at the hierarchs and say, well, gee, if those guys are divided over this, why should I condemn 700 priests of the Society of St. Pius X, good young priests? Why should I condemn 1 million of my faithful, my fellow co-religionists, traditional Catholics in the Society of St. Pius, condemn them all because of my little opinion that anything to the right of me must be wrong, right? So I think charity would say we should pull back a little bit from that. The only fault of these 700 priests, the only fault of these 1 million faithful Catholics and all of their children, their large families, their only fault, friends, is fidelity to tradition. Fidelity to the faith of our fathers. They didn't come up with something new. They're not heretics. No one's ever even accused them of heresy. They're faithfully living out their lives according to the infallible teachings of Mother Church. That's it. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind, not only tonight, when tonight's show, but moving forward towards these Episcopal consecrations, which I believe are going to happen in June or July. Keep that in mind as we go along. We're not necessarily debating Lefebvre or his society when we talk about the critics, the most vocal critics online, for example. What we're actually debating, friends, is that 900-pound gorilla in the room, the Second Vatican Council, and the reaction to it on the part of traditional Catholics. That's what it is. It's the council that's at the heart of this. That watershed event that set out to modernize the Catholic Church, and in the opinion of me and many other people, especially in the Society of St. Pius X, ended up in a disastrous, cataclysmic division and destruction, not of the entire Catholic Church, because the gates of hell can never prevail, but against the human element of the Church. And you all know what I'm talking about. Massive scandal, massive church closing, massive apostasy. Even Pope John Paul II called it the great apostasy, the silent apostasy, right? That's what's come in the wake of it. That's the fruits of the Second Vatican Council. So we don't really need to even speak of the 16 documents of Vatican II. Most people, most Catholics today wouldn't have a clue what those even are. They've never read them. Right? And when they talk about the Second Vatican Council, they're talking about the spirit of the council. And I agree, the spirit of the council is the big thing. That's the thing that changed history, because that can be, we see it all the time. Francis was always like appealing to the God of surprises, right? To the spirit of the Vatican II, whatever that's going to be. It's an amorphous thing that's just changing as we go along. Someday, I guarantee, here's a prophecy, you want to hear it first. Someday, if this doesn't stop, there will be, the human element of the church will proclaim that gay marriage is just fine within the church, because the spirit of Vatican II has enlightened us with the God of surprises. And you see how it works? And even according to Pope Benedict XVI, that spirit nearly destroyed the human element of the church.
This council created many calamities, so many problems, so much misery in reality. Seminaries closed, convents closed, the liturgy was banalized, and the true council has struggled to materialize.
I've showed you that clip many times. It's very important, because they say the critics of tradition, the critics of the Society of St. Pius X, the critics of the Fraternity of St. Peter, they say, you reject the Second Vatican Council. Oh, yeah? So I say, well, why don't you go back and look at that, what Pope Benedict said in his last talk to the Roman Curia, or to the Roman clergy. And he said there are two councils. The real one, which we never got, and the fake one, which the media and whoever presented to the world. So if we reject Vatican II, maybe that's fantastic if we're talking about the Vatican II version that Pope Benedict XVI was just decrying, right? Talk about lack of clarity. Which one are we rejecting? Because the real one never even got out, according to the Pope. And this is why Bishop Athanasius Schneider can come right out and say, yeah, absolutely. I interviewed Bishop Schneider on this question many times, a few years ago in Rome. He basically said the same thing. Yes, this thing, Vatican II, came out with their time bombs and their spirit, their council, the media, and undermined the most infallible teachings of the church, at least undermined it.
This is the problem of our time. Since the council, there were time bombs put there with ambiguity. And the deepest ambiguity is the relativism, the undermining of the uniqueness of the Catholic Church is the only one way, willed by God, for all men to go to heaven. There is no other way. And this was undermined even already by some texts of the Second Vatican Council.
Now, can you find other hierarchs, other bishops, even cardinals who would disagree with that, who would say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to hand Vatican II over to the bad guys. I can interpret that bad boy in light of tradition, right? Because that's what Benedict tried to do throughout the entire course of his pontificate. I think he failed to find the hermeneutic of continuity. By his own admission, he failed. But there are those who want to find the hermeneutic of continuity between Vatican II and tradition so that they don't let the Jimmy Martins of the world and the Pope Francis of the world just take that ball, that council, and run with it, make it all about them and their agenda to modernize and, quote, in my opinion, destroy the church, right? So you will find other bishops and cardinals like, wait a minute, no, Vatican II was okay. They're not even bad. I'm not talking about the Father Cardinal Marx or people like that. I'm talking about decent guys who are like somewhere in the middle trying to figure this out, right? But here's the thing. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre is the expert when it comes to that. What was Vatican II really all about? What about those Vatican II time bombs that Archbishop Lefebvre was so concerned about, that he knew were going to detonate and destroy the faith after the council? What about that? See, Archbishop Lefebvre was a council father, friends. This is very, very important, okay? He not only signed the documents of Vatican II, but he was instrumental in raising dubia against elements within the church at the council. I've told you about the Pact of the Catacombs. We know they were there. They were trying to take that council and change it into something else, to modernize and, yes, to destroy the traditional church, the traditional faith of our fathers. They were there too, right? And Archbishop Lefebvre was right in the thick of that. He was in the thick of trying to oppose the Rhineland bishops. You've heard that expression, the Rhine flows into the Tiber. The German bishops, what are they doing today? The same German bishops, right? They're in full-blown heresy in Germany. So Archbishop Lefebvre was there, he documented it, he told us what was going on, and we can see the result of that division in the council, at the time of the council, at the highest levels. The civil war that was going on for the heart and soul of the church. First of all, we have to admit that that happened. Secondly, we have to admit that there were some men there who saw it, who blew the whistle, tried to expose it. And one of them was Archbishop Lefebvre, even during the council. Archbishop Lefebvre was doing everything he could to stop this destruction of the church, which in many ways has left our church in ruins today. That's what he was doing. That's his role. He never wanted to part with the church. He wasn't a schismatic. He didn't want to oppose the Vatican or the Pope. It never entered his mind until he came back from Africa after years of being a missionary and was struck and horrified and shocked by the inroads that modernism that Pius X had warned about way back in 1907, the inroads that heresy had made at the heart and bosom not only of the church, but of the Second Vatican Council itself. So what he said and how he tried to warn us and what he, the extent to which he suffered to try to get the word out, to try to blow the whistle, should be very carefully and prayerfully considered. And remember, this was not some renegade. Before the council, Archbishop Lefebvre was a friend of Pope Pius XII. He's probably the most successful missionary priest in the world, but certainly of Africa, something about which I recently had a chance to ask one of his spiritual sons in Nairobi just a few months ago.
Can you say something about Archbishop Lefebvre's legacy? I know he was very successful, obviously more in Western, in Africa and Dakar and Gabon and so forth. But it seems like his legacy, by the end of his time as a missionary in Africa, he was considered the number one prelate through all of Africa. Isn't that true? So would you say that your mission here at Holy Cross in Kenya is also the fruit not only of the Society of St. Pius X, but also of the missionary effort in Africa of Archbishop Lefebvre himself?
I think, of course, for us, it's a special inspiration that the priests in France or in US maybe don't have this connection with Bishop Lefebvre as a missionary. Mm-hmm. For us, it's a special connection. We have a special example. And of course, the priests in my missions, they don't have always been the same. Bishop Lefebvre has given an example of love, I think, for his people, of care. Mm-hmm. He was, as we say, passionate about his mission to help his own people. And I hope we are trying to walk on his steps and imitate him, yeah.
Now let's just briefly run down some historical. I'm not going to get heavily into this. We just don't have time. But especially those for whom a lot of this is new, it's important to have just a vague idea of the historical background of some of this. So what you have after the close of the Second Vatican Council in 1965, early 1970s, I think it was 1971, maybe 1972, a group of seminarians disenfranchised from the seminaries from which they had recently left. They approached Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. He was the French archbishop who was living now in retirement, and they begged him to found a seminary because traditional Catholic priestly formation was already under universal assault throughout the entire church, right? So he didn't want to do this. He didn't want to start something new. As I say, he was way up in years. He was retired. But the retired Archbishop Lefebvre finally agreed to do this, to start seminary training and formation. And thus, friends, this is where it all began then. This begins an historic confrontation, I guess, is a good word because that's the reality, but it certainly is nothing that Archbishop Lefebvre himself ever wanted to do. I confront the Vatican. It's not what he wanted to do until he realized that something had gone very wrong inside the Vatican, right? So we call it a confrontation, a historic confrontation between the traditionalists, as represented most significantly by the Society of St. Pius X, and the post-conciliar Vatican. And that, as everyone knows, that goes on to this day. Nothing has changed. Only, because of Archbishop Lefebvre, there are a lot more traditional Latin Mass groups throughout the entire church exercising a lot more influence on a Vatican that, let's face it, whether through modernism or synodality or Pachamama, has drifted considerably under the influence of, I think, a diabolical disorientation. So then you have the 1976, gradually it starts heating up, and you can chronicle all this. You can read all of this in Michael Davies' books, The Apologia for Marcel Lefebvre, for example. By 1976, again, the council ends in 65. By 76, things had gotten so bad that Archbishop Lefebvre said, I think we need to ordain priests in order to preserve the faith. That's the first order of business of the priesthood and the Mass that he was most concerned about. So in Icon, Switzerland, 1976, Archbishop Lefebvre ordains priests without permission from the Vatican, and for that he was suspended. And this begins the period of suffering for Archbishop Lefebvre in the name of tradition and at the hands of the Vatican. You can see on your screen now those very famous 1976 ordinations, which attracted the attention of the world press and made news all over the world, right? Because all of a sudden, the Latin Mass was coming back, and a French archbishop was resisting the spirit of Vatican II. Now, we were there. My father and mother in 1976 attended those ordinations. And, you know, at that point, all the traditionalists were basically saying, wow, this is a game changer. Were it not for Archbishop Lefebvre's decision to act alone, well, nobody, then or now, would be attending the Latin Mass. That's just the reality. None of us would be. And why do I say that? Well, for one thing, because I was there. I was young in 1976. I was 10 years old, but I was there. And I received the sacrament of confirmation, as I've explained before, from Archbishop Lefebvre's own hand, because there was nowhere else to go. There was nowhere else to receive the traditional sacraments. There was no fraternity. There was no institute. There were no diocesan traditional Latin Masses. He was it, right? So that's me on my confirmation day. There's the Archbishop walking alongside my father there in blue. And on the same weekend then, my father, in 1976, he set up the first official introduction of the Society of St. Pius X to American traditional Catholics, right here in St. Paul. There's a little bit of footage around where you can still look at those early days of the traditional Catholic movement. A lot has changed since then. Now, 30 years after that, Pope Benedict XVI, this is so important to think about. I mean, this went on back and forth, underground revolution, counterrevolution, schism, you know, all the debates and all the sort of squabbling raging on and on for 30 years. And then finally, Pope Benedict XVI himself, in response to conditions that had been laid down now, back in 2007, by the Society of St. Pius X, that the Latin Mass be freed for the entire Church, not just the Society of St. Pius X, Pope Benedict XVI did the unthinkable. He restored the traditional Latin Mass to the altars of the Church through a motu proprio called Summorum Pontificum. The earth stood still for a moment at that point. And it was all because of one man, one French archbishop, who stood up and said no. So especially those of you who are new to tradition, you may disagree with Archbishop Lefebvre's decision, but please do not mistake him for some renegade that went off half-cocked. It broke his Catholic heart, what happened in 1988, because of the diabolical nature of the crisis, the revolution in the Church. He literally laid himself down and sacrificed everything. He died in disgrace as far as his peers were concerned, excommunicated for the stand that he took. So at the very least, we can all agree on that. Poor man. I mean, he stood up. And we, all of us now, are reaping the benefits from that sacrificial act of his. And he had reason, friends. If you study this period, sometimes I'm very concerned because we've gotten so used to the Pachamama stuff and to the crazy things that we're seeing in the church today. But if you study that period, and you go back to 1986, for example, and you look at Assisi, what happened with the prayer meeting in Assisi in 1986, you have to understand that this literally shocked and scandalized the Catholic world in a way that really had no precedent in the history of the church.
And on our left.
Now, for my father, certainly for Archbishop Lefebvre, that was the last straw. Assisi, the great prayer for peace day, modernism coming out of the closet. They actually put a Buddha, a little statue of the Buddha, on the altar in the main church in Assisi. Again, it was terrified the Catholic heart. And so, 2 years later, with a broken heart, Archbishop Lefebvre took to the pulpit and did this.
In view of the determined will of the present Roman authorities to reduce tradition to nothing and to draw everyone into the spirit of Vatican II and the spirit of Assisi, we have chosen the course of withdrawal. I have no choice. I am under an obligation. We must survive. That is why I am convinced that in consecrating these bishops today, I am upholding tradition. That is, keeping the Catholic Church alive.
Consecrating bishops without a papal mandate, friends, is a serious thing. It's happened in the history of the church. Certainly it happened during the Arian heresy. And if you don't have a state of emergency, you can't do it, quite honestly, which is why the debate then went to the Code of Canon Law. If there is a state of emergency, what happens? If there isn't a state of emergency, it becomes very subjective in the 1983 Code of Canon Law. What constitutes a state of emergency? So this blew the movement into two warring factions, if you will, with plenty of good people on both sides. We've said so many times, people, of course, are very familiar with the work of the Fraternity of St. Peter. Well, this is when the Fraternity of St. Peter, another order of traditional Latin Mass priests, it's when it was established. They were all sons of Archbishop Lefebvre. They had been ordained by Archbishop Lefebvre, right? And they said, man, I don't know about this, right? They weren't evil men. They were good sons of the church who couldn't bring themselves with that dramatic break to do something without the approval of the Pope. That's a very Catholic attitude as well. You see, that's the nature of the revolution. It was so bad that it put good men on both sides of what to do about this bad thing that happened to the church. And as I said, it broke Archbishop Lefebvre's heart, But he did it because he saw it as an absolute imperative to defend the faith itself, which in his opinion was the most important thing that he had to do. To receive the faith, he received the faith from his fathers, and it was his sacred obligation before God to hand the traditional faith down to his sons. And that's what he did. And so the war began. And there were so many dire predictions at that back in 1988 on both sides. On the one side, people were saying the Society of St. Pius X is going to elect their own pope. They're going to establish what they call the Petite Église, a little church. They're going to go into schism, for sure. Well, now if you're new to the movement, you have the advantage of hindsight. Looking back 40 years, that never happened. And right now, the Society is arranging to go into discussions, to talks with the Vatican over this very issue. Schismatics simply do not continue talks with the Vatican. Also, back in 1988, on the other side of the aisle, the prediction was, that the Fraternity of St. Peter was going to sell out to the Vatican, that they were all going to become bi-ritual, that they were going to become big fans of Vatican II, right? Well, 40 years later, I know dozens, if not hundreds of them, That never happened. So what are we looking at? We're looking at providence. In God's providence, two brothers faced off against each other over what to do about the revolution. What do we do in the face of revolution? One of the brothers engaged in overt counter-revolution, right? He was more outspoken, counter-revolution. He's on the outside of the wall, if you will, just chiseling away, hammering away, trying to break in, right? The other is on the inside, trying to subvert a little bit more, right? Their contention was that the Catholic restoration was the way forward. Just work for the traditional Latin Mass, restore the sacraments, work that way to undermine the revolution, because we only have one church. And how are we going to fight the revolution? Okay, you see what I'm saying? Who was right between these two sides, these two warring factions? In hindsight, we have the luxury of 2020, we can say they both were. They were both right. And you can tell by their fruits. God inspired his good sons to fight in his name, even though strategically they had a huge difference of opinion. To fight in his name, to advance the cause of holy tradition, to keep the faith, to save the children, the lives and the souls of the children, despite massive strategic difference of opinion on how to do that. That was the objective of both sides. Praise God for that. And as I say, by their fruits, you can know them. You know what their fruits are? From both sides now, millions have kept the faith of our fathers. Millions have kept the Latin Mass alive. The Mass has survived. It is outliving the revolution right now. It's still being discussed in Rome. What do we do about this Latin Mass issue? Because of Archbishop Lefebvre and because of his two warring sons who fought to restore the faith of our fathers and protect and defend it. Okay, so fast forward now to today. We're facing this idea, they're going to consecrate bishops. Now what? Now what? Okay, but not just to today. The run-up to today shows the Society of St. Pius X having spent years now trying to prove to the world that they're not in schism, that there's 700 priests. Pray for the Pope. No, read my lips, as George H.W. Bush said. Read my lips. If these guys are schismatics, why is it that 700 schismatics, priests of the Society of St. Pius X, pray for Pope Leo by name at every Mass, every day, throughout the entire world? What kind of goofy schism is that? And another little side, we don't have time for this, but you say, what will Pope Leo do? I don't know, but Pope Francis, of all people, actually gave the Society of St. Pius X permission to have sacraments, especially confession and matrimony, in the church. I would say once again, what kind of a schism does that? So when you see that happening, and you now, as someone who's new to the Latin Mass movement, and you hear somebody online saying they're all in schism, and you choose to ignore that the Pope said they can have confessions in the society legitimately, they can have matrimony in the society legitimately, at the very least, you have to say, wait a minute. This is not schism according to the classic understanding of what that is, which of course, as we'll say in a moment, that's a mortal sin. If this is a schism, it's the weirdest schism in history. Because again, what kind of schismatic organization prays for the Pope at every Mass? Insists that he is the Pope, fights against sedevacantism more than anybody else, and then continues to carry on the talks with the Vatican no matter what happens. Society keeps going back to Rome to have their talks to show we're not in schism. Holy Year comes along. Can we come? Yeah, okay. And they go to Rome for the Holy Year. And some of their critics are like, who do they think they are? They're schismatics. They're not supposed to come to the Holy Year, the Vatican. You know? Why? Because they're not schismatics. That's why. And again, schism is a mortally sinful act. It's an act of the will to break with the Pope. They're trying to do, and they always have, everything they can to show and demonstrate that they have no will whatsoever to break with the church. So, falling out of favor with the Pope merely for keeping the old faith is not what the church had in mind when she defined schism to begin with, right? Pretty obviously. And so today, the Superior General of the Society, Father Pagliani, has made the same decision that Archbishop Lefebvre was forced to make back in 1988. Okay, for the good of souls, I'm going to have to do this.
Et le bien des âmes correspond au bien de l'Église. L'Église n'existe pas dans les nuages. L'Église existe dans les âmes. Ce sont les âmes qui forment l'Église. Et si on aime l'Église, on aime les âmes. On veut leur salut. Et on veut faire le possible pour leur offrir les moyens pour faire leur salut. Donc on a écrit au Saint-Père.
It gets even better. The Superior General of Society is going to be meeting with this guy. Heal me with your mouth, the art of kissing, Tucho, right? He is going to go and meet with him. Now, I would be very concerned about that. We should pray about that, because my prediction is that Cardinal Fernandez will absolutely attempt to regularize the society. Why wouldn't they? I mean, if they want to control the opposition, the counterrevolution, they will try one way or another to get one of their own at the head of the Society of St. Pius X. They tried that in 1988. They're going to try it again now, in my opinion. So we need to pray on one hand, pray for Father Pagliani, and on the other hand, if he hesitates to do exactly what Tucho tells him to do vis-a-vis the selection of a new bishop, let's not be too shocked, okay? We don't actually necessarily want Tucho controlling that decision, do we? And you need to decide if we're in a state of emergency. This is the point that I will close on. Are we in a state of emergency that would justify this type of extraordinary actions of consecrating bishops against the papal mandate, or against the will of the Pope? So the question is there still a state of emergency here in 2026? Well, what do you think?
You met with our new American Pope, Pope Leo XIV. Lovely fellow. What did you guys talk about?
Initially, we talked about ministry to LGBTQ Catholics, which is part of my work.
I know Francis, the previous pope, had been open to expanding that ministry. What's the word on what Pope Leo has to say?
Yeah, the message I got from him was that he's continuing Pope Francis's mission and message of welcome and inclusion, and he wanted that to be broadcast.
That, friends, is a son of St. Ignatius. That is a Jesuit priest. That is a powerful friend of the Pope. He's on TV speaking to another supposed Catholic, Stephen Colbert, but more importantly, he's speaking to millions of people. And he's assuring them all that the Catholic Church has no serious problem whatsoever with sodomy. That's his message. Whatever his words, that's obviously what his message is. Green-lighting sodomy, one of the sins that cries to heaven for vengeance. And now, if these disturbing signs do not fit the criteria for the state of emergency in the church, then what would?
The funeral started out as most St. Patrick's Cathedral parishioners would expect one to. But outrage would soon fester from the services held for 52-year-old Cecilia Gentili, a trans woman, an advocate for sex workers, and an outspoken atheist.
Thank you, Lord.
Gay actor and singer Billy Porter, who worked with Gentili on the FX television hit series Pose, sang at the services, followed by speakers whose attire and words left old-school Catholics watching by live stream stunned, while the audience packed with fellow trans and LGBTQ members and allies roared in delight.
I hope nobody in this audience ever gets used to that, friends. Because what that is, obviously, is the abomination of desolation. Right? Prophesied in the book of Daniel, referenced by Jesus Christ himself, right? In Matthew 24:15. In eschatology, it is connected to the book of Revelation, to the apocalypse, the Antichrist setting up false gods in the holy place. Well, what do you think we just saw? And you're worried about the canonical status of the Society of St. Pius X? And yeah, as we say, there are going to be some bishops and cardinals that are going to also agree with you on that, just as Our Lady of Akita prophesied.
教会の中まで入り込み、カルジナルはカルジナルに、司教は司教に対立するでしょう。私を敬う司祭は同僚から軽蔑され、 攻撃されるでしょう。祭壇や教会は荒らされ、教会は妥協するものでいっぱいになり、悪魔の誘惑によって多くの司祭や修道者が
So too, on this issue, cardinals oppose cardinals. Cardinal Burke evidently still believes the Society of St. Pius X is in schism because he believes that Vatican II can be interpreted in accordance with tradition. I've defended and I love Cardinal Burke very much. I simply disagree with him on this issue. I disagree vehemently, but I see where he's coming from. He does, as I just said earlier, he does not want to simply hand an ecumenical council over to the Jimmy Martins of the world, to the enemies of the church and tradition. He wants to say, no, I can interpret this in light of tradition. All right, this is a Catholic attitude, even if I believe it's impossible. But there is legitimacy to that argument. I just disagree with it. There's just too much water under the bridge today for that to eliminate the very real state of emergency.
Te alabamos, Señor.
Las hijas de la selva te alabamos, Señor.
Los frutos y las flores, los árboles y el monte.
Bottom line, friends, and I will close on this, as long as the Vatican does nothing to put a stop to this diabolical madness, well, I think we can say with a great deal of certitude that the worldwide emergency in the Catholic Church has only gotten so much worse since 1988. So let's go back now a bit to May 30th, 2008. Let's go back to the Feast of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Now, I covered the ordination of 4 young men to the priesthood. 4 young men who to this day are friends of mine. They're the priests of the Fraternity of St. Peter. And this, of course, was in the Diocese of Lincoln, Nebraska. And the whole ordination was televised live on EWTN at the time, 2008. Ordination was conferred by Dario Cardinal Castrione Hoyos, then president of the Vatican Pontifical Commission Ecclesia Dei. He was the top dog. Later that day, after the ordinations, Cardinal Hoyos had a meeting with the press. There was a press conference that was set up by Father Joseph Lee of the Fraternity of St. Peter. And here I am, in fact, with His Eminence on that occasion back in 2008. We wrote it up in the pages of the Remnant, and it was recorded. Now, during that press conference, I asked Cardinal Hoyos, this is probably, to me anyway, the most important piece of evidence as far as appealing to authority that you can possibly get. Because I, in person, sitting in the room right across from the head of Ecclesia Dei at the time in the Vatican, I asked him a question, which was recorded and which is still available online. And I'm quoting. I said, Your Eminence, as a journalist seeking accuracy in terminology, is schism the correct word that I should be using to describe the standing of the Society of St. Pius X? And I will never forget Cardinal Hoyos' answer, because he was the head of the Ecclesia Dei Commission in the Vatican, set up by Pope John Paul II to oversee the Latin Mass communities. It was his job to know the answer to my question, and he answered me. He said, quote, no, schism is not the right word. There is not a schism. They have an irregular canonical standing in the church, which will be resolved by the church in God's good time. They are not in schism, end quote. He was the head of Ecclesia Dei, friends. How much higher can we go? Rome had in that room in 2008 in Lincoln, in Denton, Nebraska, Rome had spoken. You know? There was no higher authority we could appeal to. And they said, no, they're not in schism, even though their critics want them to be. They're not. And so ever since then, sincere prelates have been upholding that position of the Vatican, even of the Vatican.
Mm-hmm. A priest cannot be independent. He has to have a superior.
And if he doesn't, what should he do?
He have to seek a superior.
Okay.
It cannot be his own. This is not Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
Then he has to go to a community or to the Society of Pius X to affiliate, to have at least a superior, whom he has to give account. A priest has to have a superior.
You said, who's Bishop Athanasius Schneider? Who's Bishop what? Bishop Athanasius Schneider served as a Vatican observer of the Society's seminaries. He was sent to observe from the Vatican what's going on in the Society seminaries a few years ago. And after visiting them, Bishop Schneider argued that the Society is not in schism. and that the Holy See would be right to regularize their status. I sometimes wonder how much more evidence do we need? How much more appeal to authority evidence do you need to convince you until you say, okay, well, now I'm out of time. We're going to have to discuss this at a later day, but you get my point. And again, I'm not Society of St. Pius X, but I've traveled around and I've studied this thing and I grew up with this issue and I've talked to so many people, so many cardinals, so many bishops about this. And then I've traveled around the world and I've seen the fruits. And maybe that's the most powerful argument.
Do you feel sometimes like it's almost a similar situation as St. Francis Xavier, where you now have to try to start all over, in a sense, in Japan, trying to bring Christ to the Japanese people? Do you feel there's a similarity there?
Well, I don't want to dare to compare with such a great saint, but since, with the travel Saint Francis Xavier made to come to Japan, also I make some travel from Manila to Japan. So this physical efforts, yes, I feel that I like to follow his steps and also same faith, same gospel, same mass.
Same mass, isn't that something?
Well, I think that's what Saint Francis Xavier wanted to bring to Japan. So I want to continue what he wanted.
Yeah, everywhere we go, it's the same story. We were just a few months ago in Africa last summer, and we talked to the SSPX priest there in Nairobi. And we met his parishioners, and we met the families. We were just blown away by the fruits of the Society of St. Pius X in Kenya.
I noticed, Father, as I spend a little bit of time with you here in Kenya at Holy Cross, there's such affection, not only from your people to you, but you also in turn, such a lot of obvious affection that you have for the people here. I would imagine for a missionary like yourself, that love for the people is very necessary to keep you engaged in an apostolate like this for so long.
Yes, of course, we really need to love our people. I think if we don't love our people, we can do nothing good. Because actually our religion is just about the love of God, and how can we communicate the love of God if we don't love ourselves?
Now, in all honesty, friends, does this look like schism to you? Something you should avoid like the plague? Or does it look like the grace of God at work, bringing about the salvation of souls, raising children to carry the faith into the future? Isn't that what it looks like? Because that's how it looked like. That's how it looked to me when I was there. So the devil wants to tear us apart again over this issue. But I would beg you, friends, please prayerfully beg you to not let that happen. Over the past 40 years, we really have made so much progress on this issue, right? Uniting the clans, in fact. I'll let you in on a little secret. Unite the Clans was essentially all about this very issue. When all at once I realized as a layman years ago, I don't have to solve this. The priests, the sides, they have to they have a strategic difference, as I've already acknowledged. But as a father of a family looking for a place to take my children, I don't necessarily have to solve this. I just need to find a place to go to Mass. So yes, unite the clans. Unite the clans on the issues that really, really matter, and that's the preservation of the faith. That's the salvation of souls. The faith must survive in someone. So unite the families in charity. Even if we disagree strategically, unite on the faith. The thing that unites us is the Catholic faith itself. You don't like the society? And you don't like the fraternity? And you don't like the diocesan option? Fine! Then don't go there. Go to the place that God in His providence has shown you and enlightened you, given you the grace to see this is where I need to go to feed my soul and the souls of my children. It's as simple as that. God has given us, in other words, in the middle of this massive global emergency in the human element of the church that has seen the church suffer such as she's never suffered in the past, including with the Arian heresy. Right? He has given us, even in the midst of this darkness, He has given us oases of light. He has given us options. In the end, God is going to sort all of this out, not us. But the point is, God has not left us orphans, friends. He has not abandoned us. Yes, the shepherd has been struck, but the sheep, maybe we don't have to scatter as much as we thought. Because God has provided us faithful shepherds who will help us persevere and keep the faith. So what do? We support them. We pray for them. We believe. We keep the faith. We unite the clans. We pray for the leadership of the Society of St. Pius X in this moment, that they will see through the seduction, that they have the courage to stand against the enemies of the faith of our fathers, even, and maybe especially, when they're inside of our infiltrated Holy Mother Church.